I never thought walking my service dog around the neighborhood would turn into a nightmare. My dog Max isn't just a pet, he's trained to help me manage my disability. He's my lifeline. But Karen, the self-appointed queen of our HOA, decided she didn't like Max being around. One morning, as I walked past her house, she came out with a spray bottle filled with harsh chemicals. Before I could react, she sprayed Max right in the face. My heart dropped. Max yelped and stumbled, his eyes burning. I rushed him to rinse his face, terrified I might lose the only companion who keeps me safe. What Karen didn't know was that attacking a service animal isn't just cruel, it's a federal crime. When the police showed up, the look on her face when they explained what she had done was priceless. Her smugness froze instantly into fear. The morning began the same as it always did, with Max's cold nose nudging against my hand and his soft whine coaxing me awake. Max wasn't just a dog, he was my shadow, my guardian, and my independence rolled into one furry body. At 6 years old, he had already saved me countless times from collapsing in public or spiraling into panic when my body betrayed me. His amber eyes were patient, always waiting for me to catch up, and his steady presence kept me balanced in a world that often felt hostile. That morning, sunlight slipped through the blinds and painted golden stripes across the carpet. Max stretched, his big paws pushing against the edge of the bed, and then he pressed his head against my chest. I smiled, scratching behind his ears, thankful once again that he was mine. I got dressed, clipped his vest over his shoulders, and filled my water bottle because I always carried one for both of us. We were ready for our usual morning walk around the neighborhood. The neighborhood itself was a strange mix of pleasant and suffocating. On the surface, it looked perfect. Manicured lawns, neatly painted mailboxes, trimmed hedges that stood like soldiers along the sidewalks. But beneath that perfect picture was the HOA, and more specifically, Karen the woman, who had practically crowned herself queen of the block. She enforced rules nobody had voted on, and she made sure everyone knew she was watching. If a lawn grew half an inch too high, she left notes. If a car wasn't parked exactly where she thought it should be, she complained. And Max, was her favorite target. She had confronted me at least 3 times before, saying things like, "That mutt isn't a real service dog. You just don't want to leave him at home." Each time, I explained calmly that Max was highly trained, certified, and legally protected. Each time, she rolled her eyes as if the law didn't apply to her neighborhood. I tried ignoring her, most people did, but I had a knowing feeling she would push further. Max and I walked slowly that day, the cicadas buzzing in the trees, the air warm but not unbearable. I breathed in, focusing on the rhythm of my steps, Max's gentle tug on the leash keeping me grounded. We passed the Smith's garden, where roses bloomed like red fireworks, and waved to old Mr. Green, who always sat on his porch with a newspaper. Everything seemed ordinary until we turned the corner and reached Karen's house. Karen's yard looked different from everyone else's. It wasn't messy, far from it. The grass was cut to a sharp edge, the flowers lined in perfect rows, but it all felt staged, like she wanted it to look like a magazine cover rather than a place where real people lived. Her blinds were always tilted just enough to spy out the window, and I knew she saw me before I even spotted her. She was already outside when we passed, standing near her driveway with a spray bottle in her hand. At first, I thought she was tending to her roses, misting them before the heat climbed higher. I almost ignored her, but then, as if on cue, she turned, narrowed her eyes, and fixed them directly on Max. "What did I tell you about bringing that beast down my street?" she snapped. Stepping closer, her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. I tried to stay calm, though my chest tightened. "He's my service dog, Karen, you know that. We're just walking. That's not a service dog," she spat, her lips twisting. "That's just a mutt you don't want to leave at home. And he's making this place look trashy." Max stood tall beside me, his ears perked but calm. He was used to loud voices and sudden movements, trained not to react unless I was in real danger. But I felt his body lean slightly against my leg, sensing my tension. I was about to keep walking when Karen raised the bottle in her hand. For a split second, I still thought it was plant spray. But then she pressed the trigger, and a sharp, acrid mist shot out, hitting Max square in the face. Time stopped. Max yelped, a sound I had never heard from him before, high-pitched, pained, desperate. He stumbled sideways, pawing at his muzzle, his eyes squeezed shut as the chemical stung his skin. My heart jumped into my throat. "What the hell are you doing?" I screamed, dropping to my knees beside him. I fumbled for my water bottle, uncapped it, and poured it over his face, trying to wash the stuff out of his eyes. The smell was harsh, burning my nose. Bleach. Ammonia? Something corrosive. My hands shook so badly, I spilled most of the water. On the sidewalk. Karen stood there smugly, her hand on her hip, the bottle dangling like a trophy. "That thing doesn't belong here," she said coldly. "I warned you." Neighbors began peeking out from their porches, their conversations dying as they realized what happened. Mrs. Thompson from 2 houses down gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. Mr. Green's newspaper fell to the ground. Someone muttered, "Did she just spray the dog?" Max pressed against me, trembling, his breathing shallow. Panic swelled inside my chest, hot and dizzying, but I forced myself to focus. I poured the last of the water onto a cloth from my pocket, wiping gently at his eyes, whispering, "It's okay, boy, I've got you, stay with me." He whined, but didn't pull away. Karen's voice cut through the murmurs of the neighbors. "Maybe now you'll finally follow the rules," she sneered. I turned my head slowly toward her, and something inside me snapped. I wasn't just angry, I was done being her target. My voice shook, but it was firm when I said, "You just committed a crime. Do you realize what you've done?" She rolled her eyes, waving her hand dismissively. "Oh please, don't be dramatic. It's just a dog." "Not just a dog," I shot back. "A service dog, and hurting him is a federal offense." That's when I pulled out my phone. My fingers were clumsy, slippery with water, and trembling with adrenaline, but I managed to dial 911. My voice cracked as I explained to the dispatcher. "My service dog was just attack sprayed with chemicals. He's hurt. Please send help." The dispatcher's tone shifted instantly, calm, precise, but urgent. "Sir, I need you to stay where you are. Officers are on the way. Do not confront the individual further. Can you keep your dog safe until help arrives?" "Yes," I whispered, stroking Max's fur as he leaned against me. "I'll protect him." The moment I hung up, Karen laughed a cruel, dismissive laugh that grated on my nerves. "Go ahead, call your little friends. No one's going to do anything. This is my neighborhood." But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of her anymore. Neighbors were still watching, their phones out, recording everything. I saw the shift in their faces, not fear of Karen, but disgust. They whispered to one another, their eyes cutting toward her with judgment. For once, I wasn't the one on trial here. She was. I held Max close, whispering to him, trying to steady my own breath while we waited for the sound of sirens. The sound of sirens carried through the neighborhood long before the police cars appeared. It was faint at first, almost blending with the hum of cicadas, but as the seconds stretched, the noise grew louder, sharper, undeniable. My heart pounded. In rhythm with it, a strange mix of relief and dread swirling inside me. Max leaned against me, his head heavy in my lap, his fur damp from the water I had poured over him. He was calmer now, his breathing steadier, but his eyes were still red and irritated, a constant reminder of what Karen had just done. I stroked him gently, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep, that everything would be okay, that he was safe, that I wouldn't let anyone hurt him again. Karen, meanwhile, stood in her driveway, with her arms crossed and her chin raised, as if she were daring the police to side against her. The spray bottle dangled loosely in her hand, the smell of the chemicals still sharp in the air. She didn't look nervous. She looked annoyed, as though I had inconvenienced her by calling for help. Neighbors gathered in small clusters along the sidewalks, whispering, their phones angled toward her. For once, the power she loved to wield over everyone else seemed to slip through her fingers. The first squad car pulled up, its lights flashing across the manicured lawns. Then, another followed, parking at an angle near Karen's house. Two officers stepped out, one tall and broad-shouldered, with a calm but firm expression. The other younger, alert, his hand already resting on his duty belt. Their presence shifted the air instantly. The whispers of neighbors quieted. Karen straightened up, her smug smile plastered back onto her face, as though she had been preparing to argue her case all morning. "Officers," she began before they even reached us, her voice dripping with practiced authority. "Thank goodness you're here. That man has been letting his animal terrorize the neighborhood. I had no choice but to protect myself." I froze, my jaw tightening. Protect herself. Max had never so much as barked at anyone here. He had stood silently by me for years, his vest marked clearly with service dog in bold letters. I glanced at the officers, silently begging them to see the truth. The taller officer ignored Karen's attempt to control the narrative and crouched down beside me. "Sir, are you okay? And is this your service dog?" His eyes were on Max, his tone respectful, careful. "Yes," I said quickly, my voice still shaky. "This is Max. He's trained to assist me." I gestured toward. Karen sprayed him with chemicals. Right in the face. He yelped and nearly collapsed. I tried to rinse it off, but he's still hurting. The younger officer stepped closer, his nose wrinkling as he caught the sharp odor in the air. "Smells like bleach or ammonia." "Did you say she sprayed him on purpose?" "Yes," I said firmly, and she's holding the bottle in her hand. Karen laughed, short and bitter. "Oh, for heaven's sake. I was spraying weeds along my driveway. If his mutt got in the way, that's not my problem. Maybe he should control his animal instead of letting it wander all over the place." My chest burned with anger. He wasn't wandering. He was at my side the entire time. And he's not just a dog. He's my service animal. That makes this more than cruelty, it's a federal crime. For the first time, Karen's smug smile faltered, just slightly. The tall officer's expression hardened as he stood, turning to face her directly. "Ma'am, do you understand that harming a service animal is a federal offense? This isn't a neighborhood dispute. It's a serious crime." The words hit her like a slap. Her lips parted, her eyes darting around as though searching for someone to defend her. The neighbors stayed silent, their faces grim. Phones kept recording, capturing every second of the exchange. I didn't know. Karen stammered finally, her voice trembling for the first time. Nobody told me it was that serious. I thought you thought wrong, the younger officer cut in sharply. This dog is protected under federal law. Assaulting a service animal can carry heavy fines and even prison time, and we have witnesses. The tall officer gestured to the group of neighbors, many of whom nodded or spoke up at once. Mrs. Thompson raised her shaky voice, saying she saw Karen aim directly at Max. Mr. Green added that he had been sitting on his porch, reading, and Karen clearly stepped off her lawn to spray the dog. More voices followed, each one stacking against her. Karen's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, realizing there was no way to twist the story in her favor. The spray bottle in her hand now looked like evidence, not a prop. As the officers moved closer, one of them gently asked me to stand, helping me steady Max as I rose. We'll have animal control meet you at the vet right away, the tall officer said. Your dog needs to be checked as soon as possible. I nodded, grateful tears stinging my eyes. Max pressed against me, his body warm and solid, grounding me. I bent to kiss his head softly. You're okay, boy. We'll get you help. Meanwhile, Karen's bravado collapsed completely. The younger officer pulled out handcuffs, his tone flat and professional as he said, Ma'am, you're under arrest for assaulting a service animal. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court. The sound of metal clicking around her wrists echoed across the street. Gasps came from the crowd of neighbors, but no one moved to help her. Instead, a few people actually nodded. In approval, one man muttered under his breath. About time, Karen sputtered, her voice rising in pitch. This is ridiculous. You can't arrest me in my own neighborhood. I was just protecting my property. I didn't mean to hurt you, meant enough. The tall officer interrupted coldly, and the law is clear. This isn't negotiable. As she was led toward the police car, her eyes darted to me, burning with fury and fear. But there was no smugness left, no smirk or arrogance. Just the pale face of a woman who realized her power had finally run out. The officers loaded her into the back seat, her protests muffled by the closing door. The flashing lights painted her house red and blue, reflecting off the perfect flowers and the pristine lawn she had fought so hard to control. For once, she wasn't in charge. I stood there, trembling. Max pressed tightly against me. The neighbors still gathered in silence. Slowly, they began to approach Mrs. Thompson, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. Mr. Green bending to stroke Max's back carefully. You did the right thing calling the police, Mrs. Thompson whispered. She's been a menace for too long, but this went too far. We'll all stand behind you. Their support warmed me, easing the fear that had twisted inside me since Max was hurt. For the first time since moving into this neighborhood, I felt less alone. An animal control van pulled up, the driver stepping out with gloves and equipment. He knelt beside Max, examining his eyes and fur with practiced hands. We'll get him treated immediately, he assured me. He's strong. He'll be okay. As I lifted Max carefully into the back of my car, preparing to follow the van to the emergency vet, I glanced once more at Karen's house. It stood there pristine and perfect, but empty of the control she once wielded. The blinds were still tilted, but no one was watching from behind them anymore. When I finally slid into the driver's seat, Max, resting weakly in the back, I took a deep breath. The chaos had ended for now, but I knew this was just the beginning. Karen's arrest was a turning point, and the fallout would shake the entire HOA to its core. And though I was still shaken, one thing was certain, I would never forget the look on her face when the officer told her the truth that what she had done wasn't just cruel, it was a federal crime. The drive to the emergency veterinary clinic felt like the longest of my life. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, my eyes darting back every few seconds to check on Max in the back seat. He lay curled on his blanket, his head resting against the edge of the seat, his chest rising and falling in shallow but steady breaths. Every now and then, he let out a soft whine, the kind that tore straight through me. I talked to him the whole way, trying to sound calm, even though my voice shook. Hang on, buddy. We're almost there. You're strong. Just a little longer. The animal control van followed close behind me, its flashing hazard lights making other cars part easily as we sped down the road. I barely noticed the stoplights, the traffic, the honking horns. All I could think about was Max, the pain he must be feeling. The betrayal of being attacked when he had done nothing but exist quietly by my side. My stomach churned with a sick mix of fear and rage. When we pulled into the clinic's parking lot, I didn't even remember making the last few turns. I leaped out of the car the second it stopped and opened the back door, crouching down to help Max out. He was wobbly on his paws but still managed to stand, leaning heavily against me. His loyalty was heartbreaking, hurt as he was. He wouldn't leave my side. Together, we made our way into the brightly lit lobby. The receptionist's eyes widened. As soon as she saw us emergency, she asked, already reaching for the phone. Yes, I managed to choke out. Someone sprayed him with chemicals. He's a service dog, please. You have to help him. That last part seemed to ignite a new urgency. Within seconds, 2 vet techs rushed out with a gurney, gently guiding Max onto it. He whined softly, but didn't resist. They wheeled him through swinging doors, leaving me standing there trembling, my hands empty and cold without the leash in them. I dropped into a chair in the waiting room, burying my face in my hands. The adrenaline that had carried me through the chaos was wearing off, leaving only exhaustion and raw fear in its place. I didn't even realize tears had begun streaming down my face until I felt them soaking into my palms. The animal control officer who had followed us and placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "He's in good hands now," he said quietly. "The vets here know what they're doing. Dogs are tougher than we give them credit for." I nodded, swallowing hard, but words refused to come. My chest felt heavy, every breath an effort. Minutes crawled into what felt like hours. The clock on the wall ticked so loudly it made me want to scream. People came and went from the lobby, families with cats in carriers, a man holding a limping beagle, a young woman cradling a rabbit, but I hardly noticed them. My world had shrunk down to the hallway Max had disappeared through, and the hope that he would come back to me, finally. The door swung open and a veterinarian walked out, still wearing gloves smudged with damp spots. She was middle-aged, with kind eyes and a calm presence that steadied me the moment she sat down beside me. "Max is stable," she said first, and I nearly collapsed with relief. "We flushed his eyes thoroughly and gave him medication for the irritation. He was lucky you rinsed him right away. That made a big difference. There's some redness, and he'll be uncomfortable for a while, but I don't see permanent damage." I let out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "So he's going to be okay?" She nodded firmly. "Yes, he'll need rest and some follow-up care, but he's going to be fine. He's a strong dog, and clearly very bonded to you." He stayed calm the whole time, even when we treated his eyes. Most dogs would panic, but he just kept looking. "At the door, waiting for you." That undid me completely. I covered my face again, sobbing with relief, the kind of messy tears that leave your whole body shaking. The vet gave me a moment before continuing. "We'll keep him here for a few more hours to monitor him, but you can sit with him if you'd like." I nodded so quickly my neck hurt. "Please, I need to see him." She led me back through the swinging doors to a room where Max lay on a soft blanket, his eyes a little red but brighter than they had been. The second he saw me, his tail thumped weakly against the floor. He lifted his head, and though he looked tired, he tried to sit up. "Easy, buddy," I whispered, dropping to my knees beside him. I stroked his fur, careful not to touch near his face. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." For a long time, I just stayed there, my hand on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Each thump reassured me that he was still mine, still alive, still fighting. When I finally left his side to let him rest, I returned to the lobby to find the animal control officer waiting. He introduced himself as Officer Daniels, a calm, steady man who carried a notebook under his arm. "I wanted to update you," he said. "The police filed the initial report, but animal control has jurisdiction on the welfare side of this case. And because Max is a registered service animal, this is also being referred to federal investigators. It's not just local anymore." I blinked at him, the weight of that settling in. "So, what happens to her?" Daniels didn't mince words. "Assaulting a service animal can carry up to a year in prison and heavy fines. If Max had been permanently injured, the penalties would be even harsher. She's already in custody, and with the number of witnesses, the video evidence, and your testimony, it's a strong case." For the first time since the incident, I felt a flicker of something beyond fear, justice. Not just for me, but for Max. He hadn't chosen to be a target, and yet he bore the brunt of Karen's cruelty. The thought that she might finally face real consequences gave me a sense of vindication I hadn't expected. The next few hours passed in a blur of paperwork, statements, and check-ins with the vet. Neighbors even began showing up at the clinic, offering support. Mrs. Thompson arrived with a thermos of coffee and a box of tissues, hugging me tightly. "We're all behind you," she whispered. "She's bullied us long enough. This time, she went too far." Mr. Green shuffled in with his newspaper tucked under his arm, insisting on sitting with me until Max was cleared to go home. "I saw the whole thing," he said firmly. "I already gave my statement to the police, but I'll testify in court if I have to. That woman thinks she runs this place. Maybe now she'll learn she doesn't." Their kindness broke through the numbness I'd been carrying. For years, Karen had isolated me, making me feel like an outsider in the very neighborhood I lived in. But now, seeing my neighbors rally behind me, I realized I wasn't alone. Max and I had allies, and together, we had enough strength to push back. When the vet finally cleared Max to go home later that evening, I carried him to the car, his body heavy with exhaustion but his tail still wagging faintly. I settled him onto his blanket in the back seat, kissed his head, and whispered, "We did it, buddy, you're safe." As I drove back into the neighborhood, the sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink. Karen's house loomed in silence as we passed, her blinds still drawn, the perfect yard eerily quiet without her presence. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like her territory anymore. It felt like ours. I parked in my driveway, helped Max inside, and settled him on his favorite bed. He sighed deeply, his eyes half closing, finally at peace. I sat beside him on the floor, stroking his fur as darkness settled outside. The battle wasn't over. I knew there would be hearings, court dates, maybe even media attention. But as I watched Max drift into sleep, safe and alive, I felt stronger than I had in a long time. Karen might have tried to break us, but all she had done was unite us with the people around us, and bring the law crashing down on her own head. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe that justice really was possible. The days following the attack blurred into a strange mix of exhaustion and sharp, unforgettable moments. I spent most of my time tending to Max, carefully administering his eye drops and medications, coaxing him to rest even though he insisted on following me from room to room. His resilience amazed me. Despite everything, his tail still wagged whenever I walked into the room, his loyalty unshaken. Yet at night, when the house grew quiet, I could still hear the echo of his pained yelp. In my head, it made sleep nearly impossible. While I focused on Max, the neighborhood seemed to buzz with restless energy. Karen's arrest had sent shockwaves through the community. People who once avoided speaking out against her now whispered openly, no longer afraid of her watchful eyes. The sight of her being handcuffed on her pristine driveway had been captured on several phones, and the videos spread like wildfire among residents. For the first time, Karen's authority didn't look intimidating. It looked pitiful. One evening, as I sat on the porch with Max curled at my feet, Mrs. Thompson walked over carrying a casserole dish wrapped in foil. Her gray hair was pulled back neatly, her steps brisk but careful. She handed me the dish with a small smile. I figured, "You probably haven't had much time to cook for yourself," she said. I blinked, caught off guard by the gesture. "That's very kind of you. Thank you." She patted my arm gently. "We're all behind you, you know? I know Karen's made life miserable for you, but you're not alone anymore. People are starting to realize they don't have to live under." Her words lingered with me long after she left. For years, Karen had thrived on intimidation, making everyone feel isolated in their own homes. But now, the walls of fear were cracking. 2 days later, I received a call from the investigating officer assigned to the case. His voice was firm but polite as he explained, "Because this involves a service animal, it falls under federal jurisdiction. The Department of Justice has been notified, and they'll be reviewing everything. In the meantime, we'll need you to provide a formal statement for both local and federal records." The weight of those words sank deep. This wasn't just a neighborhood spat anymore. It was a criminal case with real consequences, the kind that could change Karen's life forever. Part of me felt vindicated, but another part trembled at the thought of sitting in a courtroom, reliving the worst day of my life. Later that week, I drove to the county courthouse with Max resting quietly in the back seat. Even though he was still healing, he insisted on coming with me, and I couldn't bear to leave him behind. The courthouse building loomed tall and gray against the morning sky, its steps crowded with people heading in and out. My palms grew clammy as I walked inside, clutching Max's leash like it was my anchor. A young federal investigator named Agent Rivera met me in a small, sterile interview room. She was professional, with sharp eyes that missed nothing, but her tone was surprisingly warm. "I want you to take your time," she said gently. "Tell me everything you remember, from the moment you saw her to the moment the officers arrived." I recounted it all, my voice shaking when I described the moment. Karen sprayed Max, the sound of his yelp, the way he stumbled blindly. I had to pause more than once, pressing my hand against my chest to steady my breathing. Max, sensing my distress, pressed against my leg, his warm body grounding me. Rivera nodded patiently, taking notes. When I finished, she said, "You did exactly the right thing. You called immediately, you documented what you could, and you have multiple witnesses. This case is strong." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "Do you think she actually faced prison?" "There's a high probability," Rivera replied. "The federal government takes crimes against service animals very seriously. Beyond that, the fact that it happened in front of witnesses makes it almost impossible for her to argue her way out." Hearing it laid out so plainly made something shift inside me. For years, Karen had acted untouchable, bending rules and bullying people with impunity. But this time, the law wasn't bending. It was bearing down on her with full force. When I left the courthouse, neighbors stopped me on the sidewalk. A young couple I barely knew nodded respectfully, saying, "Good luck, we're all rooting for you." Another man gave Max a gentle scratch behind the ears, murmuring, "Good boy. You hang in there." It was strange, almost surreal, to feel supported by so many people after being isolated for so long. Back home, the atmosphere in the neighborhood had changed. Karen's house was noticeably quieter, its blinds drawn tight. Rumors swirled that her husband had left town to stay with relatives, unable to handle the humiliation. The once pristine lawn was beginning to show signs of neglect, weeds sprouting. Between the flower beds she had so obsessively maintained, it was as if the house itself reflected her downfall. Meanwhile, the HOA board scrambled to distance themselves from her. An emergency meeting was called in the community center, and though I had never attended before, I decided to go. Max walked beside me, his vest back on, his eyes clearer now though, still rimmed with faint redness. The room buzzed with chatter when I arrived. People glanced at me, some with sympathy, others with curiosity. At the front, a few board members sat nervously behind a table, shuffling papers. One of them cleared his throat. "We want to make it clear that the HOA does not condone the actions of Mrs. Jenkins," he announced, using Karen's last name. Her behavior was her own, not representative of this community. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, "She's been representing this community for years." Another added, "You all let her run wild." The tension in the room thickened. For once, people weren't afraid to voice their anger. I didn't plan on speaking, but when I felt Max lean gently against my leg, I stood. My voice trembled at first, but steadied as I continued. "Max isn't just my dog, he's my partner. He's trained to keep me safe. What happened wasn't a mistake, it was an attack. And if we allow people like Karen to act unchecked, then this neighborhood isn't safe for anyone." Silence fell for a moment. Then, slowly, people began to clap. It wasn't thunderous, but it was enough. Enough to show me that the tide had turned. Karen no longer had the community in her grip. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me, offering to help however they could, writing statements, showing up in court, even just walking with me and Max so I wouldn't feel alone. The first time since moving in, I felt like part of the neighborhood rather than an outsider. That night, as I sat on the porch with Max's head resting on my lap, I looked around at the houses glowing softly in the dark. The air was quiet, peaceful, without the constant tension that Karen's presence had once stirred. It struck me that her downfall hadn't just been about me and Max. It had lifted a weight from everyone here. Still, the hardest part was yet to come. Court dates loomed on the horizon, and I knew facing Karen again would reopen wounds I was just beginning to heal. But I also knew I wouldn't be facing her alone. Max would be there, stronger every day, and now, so would an entire community that had finally found its voice. As the crickets chirped and Max's steady breathing lulled me into calm, I realized something important. Karen had wanted to make me feel powerless. She had wanted to strip me of dignity, to diminish the bond I had with the dog who saved my life every day. But in the end, all she had done was expose her own cruelty and awaken the strength in those around her. And as I sat there under the quiet night sky, I understood that we had already won more than just a case. We had reclaimed our peace. The weeks following Karen's arrest were unlike anything I had ever experienced. The neighborhood that once felt tense, with Karen patrolling like a self-declared warden of the HOA, suddenly felt lighter. It was as if a storm had finally passed, leaving behind a crisp freshness in the air. But at the same time, the fallout from that day, the day she sprayed Max with chemicals, was still unfolding in ways that continued to test my patience, resilience, and faith. Karen was released on bail after her initial arrest, but she wasn't allowed to return to the neighborhood. A restraining order was put in place, meaning she couldn't come within 500 feet of me or Max. For once, I could step outside my door without looking over my shoulder, without worrying that her piercing glare would meet mine from across the street. Max too seemed to sense the change. Though he had healed physically from the incident, he stayed close to me in those early days, protective and alert. I could almost feel his questions in the way he leaned against my leg. Was she gone for good? Were we finally safe? The HOA, of course, was in shambles. At first, the board tried to distance itself from Karen entirely, pretending as if she had never been one of them. But the neighbors knew better. For years, Karen had bullied residents under the board's nose, and sometimes with its approval. Some neighbors confessed quietly that Karen had been their enforcer, the one they relied on to scare people into paying fines or obeying arbitrary rules. Now that she had crossed the line into outright criminal behavior, they were scrambling to repair their image. A meeting was called one evening at the clubhouse, a place I had avoided since moving into the neighborhood because of Karen's constant presence there. But this time, I attended, not because I trusted the board, but because I wanted to see what they had to say. Max trotted beside me, wearing his vest proudly, and the entire room fell silent when we entered. For the first time, I wasn't just the quiet neighbor with the service dog, I was the man whose patience had finally exposed Karen's cruelty to the world. The board president, a man named Greg, cleared his throat nervously as he stood at the front. His usually booming voice seemed weaker now. "We, the board, want to make it clear that we do not condone Karen's actions," he said. "What happened was shocking, and we are fully cooperating with law enforcement as they investigate. Our community must move forward with kindness and respect." It was a weak speech, full of empty words, but the neighbors weren't letting him off easy this time. A woman named Lydia stood up and spoke sharply. "Respect. Where was that respect when Karen harassed us for the color of our curtains or threatened us for parking on the street? You gave her too much power, Greg, and now look where we are." The room erupted with voices, years of pent-up frustrations pouring out. I stayed quiet, listening, my hand resting on Max's head as he sat calmly by my feet. For once, the HOA board wasn't in control. The people they had ruled over were finally speaking up. It was both chaotic and liberating to witness. When the meeting finally quieted down, I stood and addressed the room. My voice trembled at first, but Max's steady presence grounded me. I'm not here to fight with anyone, I began. But what happened to Max could have killed him, and what Karen did wasn't just cruelty. It was a federal crime. I don't think any of us should forget that. If this community wants to move forward, then we need to learn from this. You can't give someone free rein to harass and abuse others just because they're loud or intimidating. That's not leadership. That's fear. A silence settled after my words, heavier than the arguing had been. Heads nodded slowly. Even Greg looked ashamed. I sat back down, heart pounding, and Max nudged my hand, as if to remind me I wasn't alone. The trial date was set a few months later. Federal prosecutors took the case seriously. Assaulting a service animal carried severe consequences. On the day of the hearing, I sat in the courtroom with Max, lying quietly at my feet, his vest freshly cleaned, his eyes alert. Karen sat across the room, no longer the smug queen of the HOA, but a woman stripped of her power. Pale and jittery, as her attorney whispered in her ear. The judge listened carefully as witnesses testified. Several neighbors described what they saw that day: how Karen had marched out with the spray bottle, how Max had yelped and stumbled, how I had dropped to my knees in panic. Video footage recorded on a neighbor's phone was played for the court. It was hard to watch, but it left no room for doubt. Karen's defense was weak. She claimed she hadn't known Max was a service dog, despite his vest and ID. The judge wasn't convinced. Service animals are protected under federal law, the judge said firmly, and the defendant's actions demonstrate both intent and cruelty. Ignorance is not an excuse. When the verdict was read guilty on all counts, a wave of relief washed over me. Karen was sentenced to a combination of fines, community service, and probation, along with mandatory counseling. More importantly, she was banned from holding any position in an HOA again and was prohibited from owning pets for several years. It wasn't the harshest sentence imaginable, but it was justice. For once, her cruelty had consequences she couldn't wriggle out of. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. I wasn't looking for publicity, but they crowded me anyway, asking questions about Max, about what it felt like to win. I kept my answers simple. Max saved my life more times than I can count, I said. All I did was protect him when he needed me. That's what love looks like. Life slowly returned to normal after that. Without Karen lurking around every corner, the neighborhood became friendlier, almost unrecognizable. People who had once stayed silent now stopped to chat during my walks with Max. Children waved at him, and he wagged his tail happily, soaking in the affection. For the first time, I felt like I truly belonged here. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with streaks of orange and pink, I sat on the porch with Max curled at my feet. I thought back to that terrifying day when chemicals burned his fur, and my heart clenched. But then I looked at him, now healthy, strong, and calm, and I realized something. Karen hadn't won. She had tried to break us. But instead, she had brought the neighborhood together and reminded us all of the importance of standing up against cruelty. Max lifted his head, his brown eyes locking on mine, and I smiled. We made it through, buddy, I whispered, gave a soft wag of his tail, as if he understood. The story of Karen wasn't just about one cruel act. It was about resilience, justice, and the power of community when people refused to stay silent. And it was about Max, the loyal service dog who carried me through my darkest moments, and who reminded everyone who saw him that kindness is stronger than hate. As the stars blinked awake in the night sky, I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath. Karen's chapter in our lives was finally closed. Max and I had weathered the storm, and now, it was time to live in peace. For more powerful real-life inspired stories, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Bright Reality on YouTube. Together, let's keep bringing truth to light.